So thanks everyone for joining us tonight. It's my great pleasure to introduce the Milstein Program in Focus session for tonight with Nani De La Pena. So this is a speaker series offered, sponsored by the Milstein Program in Technology and Humanity to profile professional leaders and to kind of describe their career trajectory and the kind of work they've done and how they got there. So without further ado, I'd like to pass it off to my colleague Anna Huff from Hamilton College Digital Arts Program, and she's going to be introducing Nani. Thanks so much, Anna.
Thank you so much, Tapan. I'm also thrilled to be collaborating with Cornell's Milstein Program, and what a great opportunity to bring Nani De La Pena today. And she'll be giving her talk, Embodied Narratives, Engaging the Future of Immersive Content. Nani is often referred to as a pioneer in the genre of immersive journalism. She's an important innovator, and she pushes boundaries of how we tell stories, receive stories, and more importantly, how we feel stories. I've heard someone describe her work as moving past what's novel in new technology to what is relevant. She's been called the godmother of virtual reality by Forbes, Engadget, and The Guardian. Additionally, Fast Company recently listed her as one of the 13 people who made the world more creative. She's also a 2018 New America National Fellow, member of the BAFTA VR Advisory Group, a TED speaker, and the 2016 recipient of the Knight Innovation Award. She's also the founder and CEO of Emblematic Group, and under her leadership, they have built a critically acclaimed body of work using a range of technologies from 360 video to VR, AR, and XR technologies, as well as AI and machine learning. I am really excited to hear what Nani has to tell us about her work. I'm a big fan, and without further ado, I present Nani De La Pena.
Well, thank you for that kind introduction. I really, really am grateful from Milstein and Cornell and Hamilton in bringing me here to speak today. I lived at Cornell for a couple of years and lived in the area, and I only wish that I was there to see old friends once again, but I'm really delighted at least to be there virtually. So without that, I'm going to launch straight into my talk. And I guess we should be ready to go. So first I'll start with a little trailer about Emblematic.
The real VR pioneer, Nani De La Pena.
What if I could present you a story that you remember with your entire body and not just with your mind? So what'd you think? Oh, you're crying. With VR, virtual reality, I can put you on scene in the middle of the story. You get this whole body sensation.
There's a bunch of cops here. They're like standing around, something's going on.
Oh, right here. That's not cool.
On the other side of a fence, there's all these people just like kicking and beating.
We can have what I call this duality of presence, a real feeling as if you are in the middle of something that you normally see on TV news.
So I started applying all these ideas, what I named immersive journalism. And we all know being there is the most important part of understanding almost anything that's happening. Along in a partnership with America's premier investigative documentary series, Frontline, who had incredible access on solitary confinement cells. What that is photogrammetry. And it's exact photographs of a cell. You are walking around the exact cell, the exact footprint. You are in the room. This works so well for putting people on scene at real stories. So then what? You got to put the people in there. How do you do that? I can now put you in the room with somebody who is videotaped in volume. You can literally walk around them in a volumetric way.
Emblematic is among the world's leading producers of virtual and augmented reality.
give people the view from the ground. And I think that that's really what has inspired me to my journalism career, which is where I started. I'm going to have I'm back in, right? Momentary glitch there. Just want to say that I come from journalism, the journalism background. And this idea of the view from the ground was something I also tried to convey when I was a correspondent for Newsweek, working on this cover story, putting you in 24 hours spent in the crack den. And then I tried to take all that journalistic knowledge and put you on scene at a real event. In this case, it was a day where a man with diabetes didn't get food in time, and he dropped into a coma because his blood sugar fell. At that point, the technologies were pretty rough. But as you saw, it ended up getting into Sundance as the first VR project there. Well, we only had this $50,000 pair of goggles, and the head of the lab at USC where I was working was like, "You're not taking those anywhere." So we started making goggles, and this is this team with looking at those two black dots in the middle are meant to represent where your eyeballs are, your IPD. And my head was skinny, and that guy's head was big and fat, and we were trying to argue about like where we should put the lenses. So this is what we showed up with, and you can see there's underneath there is the line Palmer Luckey. If somebody may know the name, at Sundance, he was crushed in my hotel room, but 9 months later, he went on to start the company Oculus Rift, which was then sold to Facebook for some $3 billion. So look at opening an idea. I don't know.
So what'd you think? Oh, you're crying. You're crying. Gina, you're crying.
We just didn't know how people were going to react. But the impact of that piece inspired a lot of people, and some pretty extraordinary people. You saw a little bit of the clip. Well, that's actually Alejandro Gonzalez Inarritu, the film director, coming to see Hunger, and it inspired him to make his own piece, Carne Reina, and I was lucky enough to work with him on that, and that's why he kindly thanked me when he got the Academy Award, the Special Academy Award for that project. But a little bit more about those goggles. When Palmer went off to start Oculus, it was still a sit-down only headset. You couldn't really walk around. And I really wanted to be able to move through content. So first I tried stapling trackers onto the headset, but that didn't work very well. So then I had to start 3D printing my own goggles and our own controllers, right? And what those lights did is they tracked with this motion capture equipment, which at that time was $100,000 to buy. So I found a set at a bankruptcy sale for $7,000 and managed to get a hold of my own. And what did I do with it? I told the story, for example, of this man, Anastasio Hernandez Rojas, who would be what we call a DACA recipient now, brought to the U.S. as a young boy, but could never have a green card for working. And during the Great Downturn, at the same time, similar to the time where we saw that long food bank line where the man collapsed, Anastasio could get no work. And on Mother's Day, he stole a bottle of tequila and a steak. He was caught. He was deported. They had 5 kids, including 2 twins under a year. And he tried to get back to his family. And he was caught by the Border Patrol. And 2 people managed to capture what happened to Anastasio that night. And I just a little bit of a warning here that this audio is pretty rough. Anyway, we didn't have 2 cameras, but this is really just taking audio. And we were invited by BuzzFeed to come and show it to the members. Here's a little bit about what we did.
I don't even know what these are. I guess cameras?
Looks like somebody's gonna shock me.
That guy's holding a lightsaber back there.
I think virtual reality really is like the next big thing. I think it's the new video game or whatever that means.
It's so weird. There's like all these people and I'm like, what is about to happen?
How's this look with my hair? Pretty good, right?
Oh, got it.
Right.
Whoa.
This is going to simulate a cell phone, so it's going to be when you press this button here, and you hold it up in front of you, a cell phone will appear, and you'll have 60 seconds to record whatever you want before your battery dies.
Oh, I see. Oh my God. That's even crazier.
All right, so there's a bunch of cops here. They're like standing around something's going on.
Oh, right here. That's not cool.
Like on the other side of a fence, there's all these people just like kicking and beating this man and he's screaming.
Look at this, and nobody's doing anything about it. Of course nobody's doing anything about it, right? Of course, because that's what people do, they just watch. It's kind of messed up.
Oh, here we go.
I couldn't tell before, but I think he's handcuffed.
I'm looking above. I'm seeing the horror.
Hey, we're recording you!
Already not moving, but there's like 5 dudes beating him.
Same thing, they just are not stopping. I don't know. I mean, I can't believe that like is real.
Did not expect a recreation of a real life beating.
I thought it was going to be some sort of possibly some entertaining game. That was not the case.
You feel kind of like helpless and isolated.
Hopefully in that situation you actually would be able to like somehow stop it, but I do think like the next best thing is recording it.
I wonder what I would really do. Like, I know you want to say stuff, it's okay to say stuff, but it's like I don't have the power to go and arrest the police. Maybe that's problematic.
I think when you see something like that, you're like, wow, that was horrible, but at least like the one.
I'm gonna move on. You can watch the rest of that if you want to. I still get disturbed watching it because it was such an intense project to work on. It's an intense story, but what you have to understand is that case got no attention. There was no press about it. There was nobody covering it. It didn't cause an outrage. And yet after we made this piece, we got nearly 1 million views. And we had pages and pages of discussion about race in America. And please know this was published in 2015. So this is pretty early days. Obviously, these conversations have gotten louder and louder. But at this point, this was the only medium I could use that created attention on a really important case. And you should know how critical this was. This young woman who recorded the scene from above and showed how many officers were involved, the Border Patrol were going around and they were confiscating people's phones and cameras. And she snuck hers out in her purse. And so when I recorded her, I also put her in a motion capture suit so she could be there next to you on that bridge in the virtual experience and recreate what she did that night. So that when she was telling you her story as a witness, she was just not giving you her words in her face. She was telling you her story with her whole body. So why does this volumetric content and spatial computing work? It's because we're really hardwired to adopt representations of ourselves as real. In this particular scene, as I told you with Hunger, I built it for $700 my own money. They're just, the characters were donated or I bought some online. And yet people in my surveys would report things like, I knew that was a seizure victim because his knees were all scuffed up. Or remember, this is just an avatar I happened to purchase. Or the woman in red who in the real story, and therefore in the virtual one as well, goes to steal food in the middle of the chaos. I had somebody say to me, I could tell she was a heroin addict by the needle marks on her arms. I mean, amazing what our minds will fill in. I like to show that this actually made the papers. This is the Virgin Mary in a tortilla, if you can't tell. But that's what people reported it as, right? But really, it's quite significant. This is a guy who was a paraplegic and was part of the study where multiple people were being tried to use brain-computer interface to drive this equipment to have people walk. But what happened is, after people envisioned their bodies for over a year, they actually returned some synapses reformed that allowed them to control their bodies. Now, they didn't get up and walk, but it did allow them to control their bowel movements, which is obviously a very significant quality of life issue. Now I'm going to move on to something that I call duality of presence. Again, from the earliest hunger, when we started learning about this, these are people down on the ground with a seizure victim. And even with those crazy headsets where you could see on the side, people were trying to talk to him and comfort him, et cetera, et cetera. I also use this, and again, a warning, some of this material is hard, a little bit intense, but I used it for a piece about LGBTQ homelessness.
40% of homeless youth come from the LGBTQ community because they've been thrown out from their homes due to their sexual orientation. After I gave my talk at TED Women, the actress Sara Ramirez approached me, and she really wanted to make this piece about homelessness in the LGBTQ community. In collaboration with the True Colors Fund, I was lucky enough to begin working with them on finding the right material to tell the story. We ended up using the audio of Daniel Pierce, who was thrown out by his own family, and he happened to record the terrible confrontation that ensues.
Oh, get off of me! What's wrong with you? You're a damn queer! What's wrong with you?
So by putting the audience in the middle of this physical moment, using the motion capture, putting on digital characters, and then making it life-size so it happens all around you, it's so startling. Suddenly this thing you've heard, which is disturbing enough, and maybe you've watched videos of this type of scene, but if it's there and you feel physically vulnerable, you connect to Daniel and to what he's going through in a way that I don't think any other medium affords. It is a really significant and powerful moment to be there with Daniel when he's that vulnerable, when he's surrounded by people who hate him just for being who he is.
You're twisting my words. You are
You are a completely different person. Let me tell you something, you little piece of shit.
But we also use new technologies, something called volumetric capture, which is with a company called 8i, in which we film from every direction around a person, and it creates a hologram. And we use that moment, that technology, as kind of a postscript to offer messages of hope, to be able to give people some ideas of, how you can get to the other side.
So that duality of presence, we did that very closely with Daniel. That piece was made very closely with him. And it did allow you to think about being in the two places at once. But here's something a little bit where I was trying to use, again, similar themes. I was asked by the Asian Art Archive to take something from their archive and make something virtual with it. And I decided to try performance art. And the piece ended up at Art Basel Hong Kong, and which it took an artist who decided to walk a brick wall across a busy street in Hong Kong, brick by brick. He'd put at the top, he'd pull one down, he'd do the next one, et cetera, et cetera. And now in our VR piece, you had to do the same. You had to take the bricks and move them across the street, even when there was like a bus coming or cars, and understand really what the artist was doing, the implications of their work. And it was a very interesting way to rethink how you would become a witness to and a performance piece. I was also then asked by the World Economic Forum to do a piece about Syrian refugees, particularly on Syrian refugee kids. And here's a little trailer of the project. So how, when we're at that point, really dealing with so much CG and not big budgets, right? This is how we try to be incredibly accurate. We did very detailed art Bibles to try to really help our, stay accurate and stay factual. They went at the World Economic Forum, seen by Peter Gabriel and the late Senator John McCain. But I think what really I felt was significant was we were invited to the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, and we didn't have really kind of any advertisement. We were just sort of put in this room, and we were shown, it was shown to people, anybody who kind of walked by and wanted to try it, right? But after 5 days, we had something like 56 pages of guest book notes. When I was told it was the largest outpouring of comments they'd had in an exhibit, Again, CG, but completely immersed, absolutely fascinating, something you feel like in the middle of something, a real feeling as if you are in the middle of something you normally see on TV news. Absolutely believable and empathy for the global citizens. I like to read this one because it was so significant for me to see this one in our guest book. This was a very difficult piece to experience as a Syrian whose family is still living in alms. Although I felt the piece was inappropriate at first, I have certainly changed my mind after experiencing it firsthand. It's important for the world to bear witness to the situation in Syria, and this is a powerful and effective way to do that. I hope you're able to grow this technology further. Let's talk a little bit about the difference between cinematic versus kinematic. So cinematic VR, I think, is when you're dealing with 360 video, 360 cameras. We did some work with the BBC and a refugee camp, and with Anuba, part about Anuba and the Sudan Mountains, all the families who stayed behind despite the bombing. This was an interesting piece where we put in a macro camera down with a time lapse down into plants in a plant zoo where Amazon basically has in Seattle, which tries to take and preserve endangered species. That is kind of cool, brings you down to the level of an ant. We also worked with Lena Herzog on a piece on endangered languages around the globe, and all the thoughts represent languages that are dying, going extinct. You can hear all the languages. So that piece went to the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., and we had probably the largest number of watchers at the same time, synchronous viewing. Obviously, you look at this as slightly nostalgically under COVID days. But here's a piece that we got to put up on the web, very recently done with Lenovo last summer, which feels like a week ago, I guess. It was with female activists. And here's a trailer for a project directed Brazil.
The hardest lesson I've ever learned? I was 8 years old. It was the lesson that we are going to lose people in our lives, and that we don't have to get used to it, but to understand and accept it. When I lost my father, I was 2 months old. My mother had been arrested, so I lived with my stepfather. I was raised by him until I was 8 years old. He was like a father to me. When my mom had been out of jail for a week, my stepfather was killed. The lesson is to accept that all of this is to make us stronger.
Okay. I want to talk a little bit about the differences in this medium, between what I consider space and place, right? To me, the space in this situation was the environment that we captured with photogrammetry, right? It's a space, it's a real cell, but it's a space that you're standing in, right? But it became a place, let's see, you're not going to play for me, when we put somebody in there. And then that
I walked into my cell, I didn't realize that I would be spending 5.5 years of my life in solitary confinement. I look fine, but I'm not. 18 years old, I was new to the system, never really been in trouble before. As an adult, the solitary confinement and the sensory deprivation, years of it, drove a relatively sane young man insane. Cut myself thousands of times, just over and over and over and over. I acted out, I assaulted staff, I committed arson, and I did a lot of bad things.
All right. A little bit more on that photogrammetry, just so you understand it better. While every, iPhone 12 now and or the Pro has a camera for going LiDAR, this is the way you just do it with the camera. On the top left, click, 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 click. And then in the middle here, you're seeing the model that gets produced from that photogrammetry. You can see there's some artifacting, which people have to clean up. And why that was so crucial for me is working with the new Center for Women's History that's going to be on the mall. They wanted to put in a report to ask for funding, and they asked me to include something for the report. And I want to do a VR piece around this amazing woman, Mary Catherine Goddard, who was a printer, and she was also a journal. She had a journal. She was a writer. She was a newspaper editor. And when the first official Declaration of Independence was printed, she was asked to do it. And when it was official, it's because all the men signed their names for the first time, because it was treason to have your name, right? And I should add a blow-up of that. But at the very bottom of there, it says printed by Mary Catherine Goddard. Now, never did she put her full name on her newspaper or anywhere else, but she signed the Declaration of Independence because she was pretty radical even in her writings. But this is the first time she put her full name on anything. And later on, this is a document where she frees her slave when she dies, and she gives her all of her money. So that's 1816. So for her day to leave her all of her money and free her slave on her death is probably a unique thing to do. But how do you make a revolutionary era printing press room when you have no budget? You find a museum piece like this in Deerfield, Massachusetts, and then you do photogrammetry of it so that you can put the people inside that space. Now I want to mention something I call embodied digital rhetoric. Rhetoric being, of course, a persuasive argument. Digital is sort of obvious for us now, but what does it mean for it to be embodied? We need to put you in that side that story in order for the piece to really be persuasive. In this case, we took a 360 camera and we clamped it to the outside of the helicopter, film over the scene. And then what we did is took that video and played it outside of a helicopter that was an exact replica of the helicopter where it was filmed. I know there's nobody driving, but that was a decision Frontline and I made because then you'd think you're really in the plane and it gets complicated. So we decided to just not have a person flying. But anyway, we put you inside to see what it's like. And here's a trailer of how trailer of how that piece kind of comes together.
When you look at the glacier like that, from the vantage point of an helicopter, it looks like it's going to be here forever. How could it possibly go away?
The glacier retreated more in the last 15 years than in the previous 70 years. We'd like to know why.
So here we're talking about they find the natural suspension that they're warming from below. And it's this warming causing the glacier to melt in unexpectedly fast ways. How do they know that?
3, 2, 1, drop.
Because they're dropping a thermometer from the back of the plane into the ocean, right? Now, if we're having you stand in the back of the plane, basically next to the toilet, right, while this thermometer drops through a tube, you can imagine dropping that tube yourself. And it gives you the idea very clearly, or very convincingly, that these aren't some people just making up their data based on mathematical numbers in their cubbyhole. They're actually out dropping thermometers into the ocean. And I think when we talk about an embodied rhetoric, this is that moment, right? You're there when this thing is happening. But in order for us to make sure that things work, sometimes we got images back from people who didn't really understand volumetric yet. So we had to actually, in a tool called ZBrush, make them embodied. So you could actually stand there next to the scientists, right? It really demystifies the science, and I'm very proud about that fact. Kia goes back into a sort of different thinking about embodiment and this persuasive argument. In this case, it's about domestic violence, particularly with the use of guns, and how you talk about that story. In this case, it was two sisters who try unsuccessfully to rescue a third sister from a fatal attack by an ex-boyfriend. And they both called 911, and I used the audio to intercut the story as it was unfolding.
Hello, this is Charleston County 911. We received a call from this number. Is everything okay?
My nephew's on the phone. He just called, asked us to come to your house because my sister, baby daddy, has a gun on her.
What's your name?
Akia Lawson. Anyway, so this is, again, the kind of Bible that we put together in order to make the scenes as accurate as possible, and know that the two sisters were very involved in the production of this piece. Again, not a huge budget for this, but the piece puts you in a room, as people said to me, I've never been in a room with someone with a gun before, and it's a pretty brutal project. You're not in the room when she dies, but I've had officers go through it and tell me, you know, I make sure you're outside when the gun goes off, which the sisters were. But I've had officers go through it and talk about the accuracy of the scenario, various other people, to try to really help people understand when 3 women a day are killed by their partners, ex-partners with a gun, this is a really significant issue. So, sorry, there's some singing bars at my door. Unusual one here. But anyway, the future, I think XR is the future, combining duality of presence that I talked about with the spatial. Here's the LiDAR scanner of every iPhone, which lets you make objects volumetrically. And, you know, Google's been releasing data sets for 3D object detection as we go into thinking more and more about objects. And people are getting better and better. This was on a Microsoft stage where that woman was a Olympic fencer, and she could fight this guy when she was 10 because there was no women to battle with. Obviously, we had swords in it. Then they battled against each other in college, and then they ended up getting married. I think this is the first volumetric kiss probably ever recorded. It's very sweet. It makes me very happy that we did this. This is a piece I'm working on with Microsoft Research and Honor Health and Arizona University. And it's on informed consent for port placement for chemo. We're in the middle of this study. And in this case, we're looking at, okay, you're watching people, one person, a doctor describing to a patient what is going to happen when the chemo port is placed. But with the latest technology, we can actually make the character who's captured with video frames, you might remember, and they can actually look at you.
As you start your new treatment, you're going to have...
Even when you turn your head. What is it? Move your body.
So the port is a round device with a thin, soft tube attached to it, and it's used to carry medication into your bloodstream.
How big is it?
So it's about the size of a quarter coin, and you'll be put into a light sleep before a small surgery.
A little bit about virtual production. This is a project that ended up on the cover of Days, which is super fun for us. And this was for a group called GCDS, who needed to have their Milan fashion show be done virtually because obviously of COVID. So this was a trailer from, or this is just a little snippets of what we actually ended up making using all game engine work. You can look at the flow of the clothing and the crazy camera work that literally killed one of our $7,000 computers in the rendering process. one of our latest projects is called Trash. It's a VR game that documentary game that lets you reenact some of the greatest trashings by musicians in history. It's nice to be able to do something that makes you laugh. We're in the middle of making that currently. And just, so you understand the sentiment here, I live in hotels, I tear out the walls, I have accountants pay for it all. It's a very funny and fun game, but very embodied. Finally, I want to talk about democratizing immersive creation. I've been working on something, it's like a no-code solution called Reach. And the idea of Reach is to let anybody start working in this medium. Let's see if we can get this.
Introducing Reach, the first web platform for creating and sharing extended reality, including augmented and virtual reality, using real people and places. Built by the pioneers at Emblematic Group, Reach is an easy-to-use, browser-based solution that makes the power of walk-around spatial experiences available to anyone. Reach lets you craft your own volumetric stories in 3 easy steps using a no-code drag-and-drop solution. First, you access a library of 3D locations, many of them captured using stunning high-resolution photogrammetry. You can also upload locations you've created yourself. Then, use our simple tool to add your own real-life video interviews, volumetric characters, or 3D assets. Finally, you can share the results via a simple web link. Embed your finished story just like you would a video. No need for downloads or dedicated apps. Reach eliminates all the distribution barriers facing room-scale VR. Viewers can navigate stories on a smartphone, tablet, or PC, or put on a headset and walk around for full immersion. Sign up now to discover how far you can reach into the future, where the stories we tell are as vivid and three-dimensional as the world we inhabit.
So how am I using that? My own Reach platform. So this is a project I can't answer yet, but it's going to be have a big launch very soon. But I've been working with a wonderful director named Sharon Yamato on the story of Stanley Hayami, who was a teenager who was taken from his home, his high school, in San Gabriel, California, and put in one of the Japanese-American concentration camps during World War II. I don't know if you know, but you should be familiar with the fact that we incarcerated our own American citizens during World War II just because they were of Japanese descent. And Stanley was an incredible artist. And so we've animated his drawings and also did photogrammetry of barracks to understand how cramped it was. And the thing that I can show you here is that we were able to make a trailer that was got embedded in The Guardian so that I can show you how immersive trailers even work. So as you see, I'm clicking it. Now I'm just using my mouse to spin around, and then I can use my keyboard, WASD keys or arrow keys, to move through the space. So it's fully immersive, even though it's in the web, right? And then if you have a VR headset, all you have to do is click the VR button, and now you can literally walk in the space. So the goal is to make it so you can do it on a phone, you can do it on your computer, or you can do it in a headset, and that is purely button-based. And that's all I'm going to talk about today, and I'll be happy to answer some questions.
Nani, thank you so much. That was really fantastic. And, I was waiting for all the applause and then, remembered we're on Zoom. I have oh, go ahead.
I wish I was there.
Right. Yeah.
This time.
We'll bring you to the gorges sometime. So one thing that I just think is so exciting, I feel like it's really the story of a true visionary artist where there's always this process, and you bring up budget a lot, right, in your talk here and there, because I think that's a really important thing to think about. And I know one of our audience members was sort of curious about this idea of access and cost. And I guess in short, there's this issue of access and equity that comes up with digital assets, and I'm following the conversations about NFTs right now, noticing various people I know who are involved and taking sort of a side, right? like, you should monetize digital assets, you shouldn't monetize digital assets. And I just thought it was so great that you brought avatars into that first piece that you found, right? And I talked about that with my students. And I guess my direct question is, do you have a sense of how to reconcile, if it needs reconciling, that conversation around, should things be free, should they not be free? How do you create a dialogue around that, especially if both are contributing to a really effective story?
Well,
it's kind of a
that's a very tough one, because as somebody's been running a studio, and the pieces have never been, massively well paid, it can be hard. I've got people who work for me and they need to pay their rent and they need to eat. And, I'm getting sucker punched by my daughter's college fees, right? Because I've been so committed to this work. So I kind of feel like artists should be allowed to make a living. That isn't always just getting by, but it depends, right? I live in Los Angeles, and this neighborhood has become very expensive. But if you're in Hamilton, my guess is it might be a little easier to meet your expenses and still get to create stuff. So, I guess it's really relative of what to charge or not charge. And, we know that if you're a college student, you're going to be more likely to get some of your music for free. I tend to pay for my music now. I mean, that's just the way it is, right? I rarely, but I am in a different position. So, I think these things are a sliding scale, honestly.
I think that makes sense. And I recently was on Reach because, I think, again, you have things like Google Poly, right? Or companies like Mozilla. And there does seem to be a lot of generosity right now in terms of, although Poly, I think, is going away. Right. Yeah, it's sad, right? So sort of a community of generosity. And I think that actually leads to my next question for you is this idea of the potential for the social in these spaces. I think especially post-pandemic, I actually think I might have seen your avatar walking around in one of the Sundance New Frontiers rooms, right? I've been noticing all these ways that people are integrating avatar bodies with their actual faces and then using the laws of physics, right? Or the unity laws of physics or whatever it's built in that you can create and also defy, right? To kind of recreate embodiment. And so, I guess I wonder, this is sort of meandering, but what I'm trying to get at is this question of the social, of embodiment, and also how you use hyperrealism and the laws of physics and then combine it with this very surreal potential, right? So in the solitary piece, you're in the room, but then you step out and suddenly there's a video playing on the window of what would be the cell door. And so I'm kind of combining this all into one, and then I'm going to go to a few audience questions, but I'm curious about your sense of what we'll move into in what's possible with the social and how that hyper real space can enhance or even sometimes take away from the impact of storytelling.
Well, I want to kind of combine the first part of your question, which is that, one of the reasons why I did Reach was because of the lack of diversity in these spaces, in these tech creation spaces. It's still shocking. It's shocking, actually. It makes me really upset. And I do my best to try to have some interns or talk to people, and I just can't. I can't physically meet that need. And so one of the things that Reach is to hope that whatever that social is, that it's just not my voice, that I'm giving the people whose story this is the tools to tell their own stories.
Right.
And that we can, at this start of the XR moment, that we don't just, it isn't just limited to those who, you know, have the resources to make this stuff, that we're able to, you know, let people learn about it, get the skills, understand spatial creation, understand what does it mean to have the social and the physics and the, you know, play with it or adhere to a mirror of the real world, whatever it is for their story that makes the most sense. But that as they grow in the space, it means that the leaders in the space are more reflective of our country. And that I really hope that by, you know, I mean, I'm bootstrapping that tool. I don't know how long it'll be here or whether, you know, I wish that I had better funding to actually grow it properly or make it available for free. I think soon we're going to have to ask people to please pay us something because I don't know how to maintain it. So back to your first question too. But one thing I do want to say about thinking about these spaces and thinking about creation, even though mine are often grounded in some sort of documentary or journalistic story somewhere, even if it's just the clothing, our actual real clothing and the fashion, that try to remember that there's things you can do in this space where you take advantage of this space. You know, there's stories that are better. I still think you can tell the same story, but in a different way in radio or print or broadcast, right? We do that all the time. Right. And I think that's true also for VR or AR, but you have to just think about the medium itself in the way that you construct that tale. And remember, there's cool things you can do in this space that you just can't do any other way, right? What does it mean to have a close-up, for example? You can't you can't force people to look closely at something. You have to make the thing big. So, you know, just thinking about what it is that works. The other thing that I really, if I was just going to give a tech comment, when you make these pieces, I highly suggest that you don't use film, pans, or zooms. You lock the camera down and let the user move around or walk through the space. You can move the camera, but what happens is, I would say 35 to 40% of your audience will get nauseous because their eyes are saying they're moving and their inner ear is saying they're sitting still, and that just makes you feel awful. So I get that kind of sickness very quickly. I can't stand it when people do that to me. I want my body to choose when I'm moving.
You know, that actually, an audience had asked that question. Jody had asked, are there effects on someone's brain afterwards or negative effects in other areas? And you know, I know we don't put our 4-year-old in a VR headset and probably won't show her what that is until she's, you know, a young adult potentially, but maybe you know a little bit more about the science behind that.
Well, I'm going to be the other side of this, right? I'm in this so you can just say, well, this is what she does, so of course she's going to respond this way. But here's my comment on this. There's some very interesting studies on how somebody's brain changes if they have a singular violin teacher versus if they just try to learn violin in an orchestra. Their brain changes. Is that a bad thing? There's lots of work on if you use a hammer a lot, the brain changes. These, you know, there's an Andy Clark, natural born cyborgs. Humans are natural born cyborgs who take tools. So the questions about brain changes, your brain is going to change if you use these things, I'm sure, a lot, because I can almost conjure up the duality of presence now that I know when I put on a headset, although it still can be remarkable and almost, I don't know if anybody's had a chance, even to just do the Vader Immortal on the Quest is pretty remarkable. So I tend to feel less concerned if you're, computers are changing things, and I miss the fact that my son used to read so many novels, and now he does lots more gaming. But comic books were outlawed for a little while. So I think that content and the way that we experience content will change us. And is that always a good thing or a bad thing? I think you have to choose what material is. I think nobody would care about a violin brain changing, right? So I think it's really about what the content is that people experience.
So we have a time for a few more audience questions, I think, and then we can wrap up. There was a question from Ethan, and he said, how do you ensure the tenets of journalism remain intact during the VR process so viewers' experience is not a sensationalized version of the actual event?
So there's a couple things that you have to think about. One of the first is, what are some of the best practices that are utilized in other journalistic media? When we first got cameras into the Vietnam War, footage was being shown at the 6 o'clock news when most families were having dinner and had their television on to watch the news. And there was a huge response to that afterwards, where news organizations realized that was maybe an inappropriate, not maybe, it was an inappropriate thing to do, just to feed this really horrible footage straight into people's living rooms. On the other hand, BBC Newsnight, I saw more stuff about the Syrian war in the BBC News than I did here ever. So it becomes a really important thing to try to think about what are some of the best practices, but also know that you have to be careful to not censor too much. I've seen a lot of BLM folks talking about the material coming out of the George Floyd, Derek Chauvin trial, and saying, rather than saying we should look away, they're saying we need to look at. And it feels sensationalistic to look at. It feels voyeuristic. But they're saying you have to stop looking away. You have to look at. And I've been kind of surprised to see that myself, because sometimes I get very nervous about what I produce, but I try to, like in Kia's case, really work with the sisters. They became activists. They wanted this kind of a piece made. So I try to do it with the most ethical and responsible way that I can. But I think you're absolutely spot on to always ask yourself that question. Is this getting toward the sensational?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And the so it may be our final question. I don't know exactly what our cap is, but I'm sure someone will nudge us. But a question from Meredith came in, and it is, do you see VR becoming a lot more accessible, normalized for everyday people, part of college technology curriculums? So more people are exposed to stories you're trying to tell, or is there an effort we all should be making to get it out there?
Mm-hmm. I think right now we still need the effort. I think at some point, when we know that Apple's top hardware guy has been moved over to the AR VR team, that they're working on some sort of device, so it's going to get integrated into our normal usage. But I still think at this point, if you find it interesting, obviously it's great. If you think that your education should include material like this, then I think you need to raise it and bring it up. I do see this really growing movement among academic organizations to start bringing this into the curriculum, which I think is why Anna ended up at Hamilton, right? Professor?
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, it's a great opportunity to think about the potential. And I know Hamilton has been very committed to incorporating it into their curriculum and pedagogy. I'm sure that
Milstein is obviously way ahead of this. To be honest, it was when I was in Ithaca that I conceived of my first VR piece, which was I'd done a documentary that included a big segment on Guantanamo Bay Prison. And while at Ithaca, my husband was a visiting professor, and I was like, oh, wow, what am I doing here? But while I was there, I conceived of the idea of, with a partner, a digital artist named Peggy Weil, who was at USC, one of my best friends. I found out about this grant, MacArthur grant, and I was like, I really want to do something about putting people on scene at Gitmo, because it's just out of sight, out of mind. And we ended up coming out with the virtual Gitmo in Second Life. And that was the launch of my career. So it seems to me Ithaca ought to be a hotbed of this, Ithaca area.
Right, and I think another audience member had asked about really how technology has changed since you started to where it is now, and I think we saw some of that obviously with these really early kind of just I'm not going to say duct tape together, but it felt a little like. Oh, okay, great, right. That's a great tool, is duct tape, right? But now to these LiDAR phones, right? And I often have my students. They're not using LiDAR, but there is sometimes this really DIY sensibility around, well, how can you just make something happen with what you have, right? So it does seem like technology is becoming more accessible for this kind of storytelling. And I'm going to ask one final question from an audience member. I'm not sure who asked this question, but I thought it was really interesting. Do you find this technology will find acceptance in legal systems?
So my understanding is that police departments are already scanning their crime scenes with LiDAR, and indeed are capturing all stories volumetrically. I mean, I had one LiDAR company guy told me that they were asked to go capture the Pulse nightclub shooting scene, so you can imagine. So yes, indeed, I think that this is going to be a normal part of police departments. So the thing is that people who have the LiDAR in their hands also, for obvious reasons, need to be able to know how to use it as well.
Great. Well, I'm sure I don't speak just for myself when I say that I wish this conversation could go on for another hour, right? Because there's so much to unpack in how we're moving forward with all of this new technology. And I just want to thank you so much for coming to both of these communities, Hamilton, Cornell, and the public for watching. And I believe that that it's time to wrap up. And so thank you so much. And I'm going to clap. I know some people.
Thank you so much for having me. I really, really amazing that my journey would come full circle. I wish it was there in person, but literally it's the first ideas of immersive journalism were born in Ithaca. And I hope everybody who's working on the listening today can help me take it further. Thank you.
Great. We hope to have you here someday. Thank you so much.
All right. Bye now. Bye.